Welcome to Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiburg. Now, before we get into today's discussion, I have a quick request. If you enjoy what we do here, please make sure to follow and subscribe wherever you're listening. And if you really want to support the show and get access to some extra episodes, you can subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts for a small monthly fee. It helps keep the lights on and the research coming. There's a link right in the description. Okay, let's get into this. When we talk about international relations, we usually think about, the ticker tape at the bottom of the news screen, right?
With summits, treaties, maybe a crisis at the UN.
Exactly. But today, we're going way back. We're looking at the ancient foundations that, believe it or not, still dictate how nations behave. We're looking at the ultimate clash between the ideal and the real.
It's fundamental tension.
It is. And here's the question I want you to keep in mind, and it's one that, frankly, bothers me when I read the news. If a leader wants to be good, morally good, ethical, does that automatically mean they will be weak?
Oh, the big one.
To answer that, we are contrasting two absolute titans of political thought. In one corner, we have Aristotle, who thought politics was all about human flourishing. In the other, Niccolo Machiavelli, the man who arguably taught the world that politics is about survival and power.
It is the heavyweight matchup of history, really, because it defines the two poles of how we even see the world. On one side, you've got this aspiration for justice, this idea that we can build a better society.
The hopes.
Right? And on the other, you have the cold, hard requirements of security where, well, morality is often seen as a liability.
A liability, wow.
So our mission today is to explore Aristotle's views on war and foreign policy, and frankly, most people get him wrong. He wasn't just some dusty academic.
No.
And then we'll pivot to Machiavelli's radical break from tradition, specifically why he argued that learning not to be good is a political necessity.
Learning not to be good. That is a phrase that always just sticks in my throat.
It should. And to make sure this isn't just abstract theory, we're going to apply these ancient ideas to modern crises, like the situation in Syria and this concept of the responsibility to protect.
RTP, yeah.
And finally, we have to look at maybe the most famous teacher-student mismatch in all of history, Aristotle and Alexander the Great.
That is a relationship I have always found wild. You have the philosopher of moderation teaching the man who tried to conquer the entire planet.
It's the ultimate paradox.
But let's start with Aristotle. I feel like most people, myself included, think of Aristotle as the ethics guy.
Yeah.
Virtue, happiness, being a good person.
Yeah, the personal stuff.
Did he really care about international relations? Or were we just kind of projecting modern ideas back on him?
Oh, he absolutely did, but you're right that it's often overlooked. There's some great research that corrects this misconception. Aristotle was actually very critical of other thinkers of his time, like Phaleas and Hippodamus.
I don't recall those names from Philosophy 101.
Most people don't. But Aristotle went after them specifically because they ignored foreign relations. They were designing these perfect utopias on paper, but they treated the city like it existed in a bubble.
So he was calling them out for being totally naive. Isolationists.
Essentially, Aristotle's whole argument was that you cannot have a perfect city or a best regime without considering your neighbor's war and defense.
Doesn't matter how great your city is if someone else burns it down.
Exactly. He believed military strength was necessary, but, and this is the key nuance, he argued that military power shouldn't be the only goal, and he used Sparta as his prime example of what not to do.
Hold on. Sparta, the warrior society, guys from the movie 300. I thought they were the gold standard for ancient military power. If you want a strong foreign policy, don't you want to be Sparta?
They were the gold standard for fighting, yes. But Aristotle argued that was actually their fatal flaw. He critiqued Sparta and Crete because their entire society, their laws, their education, everything, was designed solely for war.
But they won. A lot.
They did. But Aristotle pointed out, this system works great while you are fighting. But the moment Sparta achieved its goal, empire, and peace, they collapsed. They didn't know how to live in leisure.
That sounds a bit philosophical. They didn't know how to live in leisure. Does that just mean they got bored?
It's deeper than boredom. It's like, think of a startup that's all about hypergrowth. They break things, they move fast, they're aggressive.
Right.
Then they win, they become the monopoly, now they have to manage a stable business, and they just implode. Because they don't have the virtues of peace, governance, culture, diplomacy. Sparta was a war machine that broke down the second you turned off the war.
That makes a lot of sense. It's the dog catching the car problem. They caught the car and then had no idea how to drive it.
That is a perfect analogy. For Aristotle, war must always be for the sake of peace. It's a means, not an end. If you make war the end, you destroy yourself.
Okay, so that leads into his idea about leadership, doesn't it? The hegemon.
Exactly. He believed a state could be a leader, a hegemon, without becoming a master or a despot.
Let's unpack that distinction, because in modern politics, hegemony usually has a really negative connotation.
It does, but for Aristotle, it comes down to who benefits. He distinguishes between political rule and despotic rule. Despotic rule is like a master over a slave. It's all for the master's benefit. The slave is just a tool.
It's pure extraction.
Precisely. But political rule is ruling over free people for their mutual benefit. Aristotle's ideal regime, his city of prayer, isn't isolationist. It engages, it trades, it leads, but it acts as a partner.
So a coalition leader, not an emperor.
That's a good way to put it. Think of NATO at its best versus an old-school empire just stripping resources from its colonies.
So the ideal is a strong state that leads free neighbors rather than conquering them. But let's be honest, that sounds incredibly optimistic. It sounds nice in a lecture hall.
It does.
But does it work in the real world? And that brings us to the guy who famously threw optimism out the window, Niccolo Machiavelli.
Right. And it's so important we don't just paint Machiavelli as a cartoon villain. He was looking at the chaos of Italy in his time invasions, corruption, weakness, and trying to find a solution. If Aristotle was asking, how ought we to live, Machiavelli was obsessed with the effective truth.
He focused on what is, not what ought to be.
Exactly. He's the realist to Aristotle's idealist.
But surely Aristotle knew the world was messy.
Oh, he did, but Aristotle thought we should still strive for the ideal. Machiavelli thought striving for the ideal would get you killed.
So to get Machiavelli, you have to understand a few key terms.
You do. Virtu, fortuna, and necessita.
Okay, virtu. That sounds like virtue, like being a good person, being honest, helping old ladies cross the street.
It sounds like that, but in Machiavelli's dictionary, it means almost the opposite. For Machiavelli, virtue is not moral goodness, it's civic virtue. It's skill, strength, flexibility, the sheer capacity to get things done.
It's effectiveness.
It's effectiveness. It's the ability to maintain power and deal with fortuna, which is just the luck or the chaos of the world.
So a mob boss could have virtue.
Absolutely. If he runs his organization effectively, protects his territory, and outmaneuvers his rivals, he has virtue. And sometimes dealing with the chaos of fortuna requires necessity. The idea that sometimes, to survive, you must do evil.
Must do evil. That's the part that always gets people. It's not you might have to, it's you must.
It is the core of his break from tradition. Look at the example he uses of Agathocles from The Prince. Agathocles was a common citizen, a potter's son, who became king of Syracuse.
A plotter's son to king. That sounds like a fairy tale.
The ending is definitely not. He rose through the military. Then, one morning, he calls the Senate and all the leading citizens together, supposedly to talk business.
Uh-oh.
At a signal, his soldiers rush in and kill all of them, all the senators, all the richest men in the city, just like that.
Good Lord. Wiped out the entire government in the morning.
Wiped them out. And after that, he ruled without any internal opposition. Now, here's the twist. Machiavelli asks, was this virtuous?
I'm going to go with no.
And Machiavelli agrees. Sort of. He doesn't call Agathocles virtuous in the moral sense. He says you can't call it virtue to kill your citizens and betray your friends. He says you can get power this way, but not glory.
Okay, so there's a line.
But he acknowledges Agathocles was successful because he used cruelty well.
Cruelty well used. That is a chilling phrase. What does that even mean? Is there a good way to be cruel?
In Machiavelli's grim logic, yes, it means doing all the nasty stuff at once. Secure your power, eliminate your threats in one big ugly swoop, and then you stop.
Why stop?
Because of human nature. Machiavelli argues that people have short memories but high sensitivity to ongoing pain. If you drag the cruelty out killing one opponent every week for a year, people live in constant fear and hatred.
They never feel safe.
Never. But if you do it all at once, the shock is massive, but then it's over. And if you follow it up by providing security and stability, people might eventually forget, or at least forgive you, because their own lives are stable again.
That is dark, but I can see the psychological logic. It's the idea that a bandage should be ripped off quickly.
Exactly. So Aristotle says the goal is eudaimonia flourishing. Machiavelli says the goal is security and the maintenance of the state. If the state falls, morality doesn't matter because everyone is dead or enslaved.
And this is where he really clashes with the Christian morality of his time, right?
Yes, and this is a great point. Machiavelli wasn't necessarily saying he loved evil. He wasn't a sadist. He was arguing that private Christian morality, turning the other cheek, humility, forgiveness, is disastrous in public politics.
So what's good for your soul is bad for your state.
That's it in a nutshell. He basically says, if a leader tries to be good in a world of bad men, he will be ruined and he'll take the state down with him.
That is the crux of it, isn't it? The responsibility of the leader. If I'm a private citizen and I turn the other cheek, I only risk myself. But if I'm a leader and I do it,
You risk your entire nation. Precisely. He would argue that the good leader who lets his country be conquered because he refused to fight dirty is actually the immoral one.
so let's pivot. What does all this mean for us today? We aren't ruling ancient city-states. We're watching the news on our phones. How does this apply to, the learner, the listener looking at the world right now?
It applies directly to how we view modern diplomacy and intervention. Take the concept of R2P, the responsibility to protect.
Right. The idea that sovereignty isn't a blank check. If a state is massacring its own people, the international community has a duty to step in. It sounds very Aristotelian.
It is. It's focused on justice and human well-being. But let's look at the crisis in Syria, specifically that famous red line moment under President Obama regarding chemical weapons.
Oh, yeah. The red line. Obama said if chemical weapons were used, that would change his calculus. It was a threat. Then they were used, but the U.S. didn't launch major intervention.
And that moment perfectly encapsulates this tension. If we look at it through an Aristotelian lens, we have to ask, does intervention promote living well?
Explain that. Because surely stopping a dictator from gassing people promotes living well.
You would think so on the surface. But Aristotle emphasizes Phronesis' practical wisdom. A leader has to weigh the long-term impact. If you intervene, can you actually create a better world? Or do you just blow things up, leave a power vacuum, and make it even worse?
So Aristotle might say, don't go in unless you can actually fix the house.
Yeah.
You can just knock down a wall and leave.
Exactly. The capabilities approach asks, can people actually live decent lives after you leave? If the answer is no, Aristotle might actually advise caution.
Okay, so that's the Aristotelian view. But what about Machiavelli? How does he look at the red line?
Machiavelli looks at it purely through power and reputation. He would ask, does this strengthen our state? When Obama drew a red line and then didn't enforce it, Machiavelli would be screaming.
Not because he cares about the Syrian people, but because it showed weakness.
It's all about credibility. Machiavelli would say, armed prophets conquer, unarmed ones fail. When Obama said the international community was paralyzed, Machiavelli would nod and say, see, reliance on shared norms is a fantasy. If the norms don't have force behind them, they are just words.
And you just taught your enemies that your threats are empty.
You did. So the dilemma for a modern leader is, do we act for the long-term global good, the Aristotelian view, which is incredibly hard to calculate, or do we act to preserve our national reputation and security, the Machiavellian view, which might mean striking violently just to prove a point?
That's the eternal struggle. It's short-term survival versus long-term well-being. And every leader is stuck right in the middle of it.
Every single day. Speaking of leaders, we have to talk about the ultimate case study. We can't do this without talking about the fact that Aristotle actually had a student who went into politics.
And not just any student. Aristotle was the personal tutor of Alexander the Great.
Which is just mind-blowing. It's like finding out that Gandhi was the personal tutor of Genghis Khan. It is the ultimate irony of history. Aristotle taught him from roughly age 13 to 16. And we know from sources like Plutarch that Alexander idolized him, at least at first.
Right.
There's this great detail that Alexander famously slept with two things under his pillow, a dagger and a copy of Homer's Iliad.
A dagger in a book, that says it all.
And that copy of the Iliad was annotated by Aristotle himself. Alexander carried his teacher's words into every battle.
But did he actually listen to the teachings? Because Aristotle was all about the small city-state, the polis. He preached moderation, the golden mean.
And Alexander went out and conquered the known world. He created a massive, sprawling empire. He didn't stay in the polis. He smashed the borders. And crucially, Alexander started mixing cultures, encouraging his generals to marry Persian women, adopting Persian dress.
Things Aristotle, who was pretty ethnocentric, would have hated.
Likely would have hated, yes. He viewed non-Greeks as barbarians.
So Alexander had Aristotle's book, but he had Machiavelli's instincts.
In a way, yes. He had the greatness of soul that Aristotle talked about, but he dialed it up to 11 and broke the knot off.
So did Aristotle fail?
That is the big question, isn't it? Did he fail to teach Alexander moderation? Or did Alexander take Aristotle's lessons on greatness and realize that to be truly great, you have to ignore the rules? Ancient historians like Plutarch try to pretty it up, but the reality is Alexander's life became the antithesis of Aristotle's ideal.
It really makes you wonder what Aristotle thought as he sat back in Athens getting the news, watching his student become a god king.
He likely watched with a mixture of pride and absolute horror. He created a force that he just couldn't control.
So bringing it all back home, we have these two massive figures, Aristotle looking for justice in an international society, and Machiavelli seeing a state of nature where survival is the only rule. Which one is right?
I don't think we get to choose just one. We are left with a choice in how we view the world, but the world forces both upon us. Every time you turn on the news and hear a politician talking about national interests.
That's Machiavelli speaking.
That's Machiavelli. That's survival. And every time you hear them talk about human rights or the international community,
That's Aristotle. That's flourishing.
we are replaying this 2,000-year-old debate every single day.
It really changes how you listen to a press conference.
Uh-huh.
You stop hearing just talking points and start hearing these ancient ghosts arguing.
Absolutely. And I want to leave the listener with a provocative thought. We often judge leaders by their moral intentions. We ask, did they mean well? Were they a nice person?
Right.
But history judges them by their results, the effective truth.
The effective truth.
So if a leader commits a crime to save a nation, is he a criminal or a savior? And conversely, if a leader stays morally pure, keeps their hands clean, but lets their nation fall into ruin because they wouldn't do what was necessary, is their innocence worth the catastrophe?
That is a heavy question to leave you with, but that is why we do this. It's easy to be good when you have no power. It's a lot harder when the weight of the world is on your shoulders. Thanks for listening to this exploration of power and philosophy. Remember, if you want to help us keep exploring these topics, please follow the podcast, rate us 5 stars so more people can find us. It really does help. And check out the subscription link in the description to support the show. Until next time, thanks for listening.